Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am with Andy Niner of Niner Wine Estates in Paso Robles. Andy, you're the president of Niner Estates. Tell us a little bit about it.
We're a family company, so president is a big title for a smaller job. But we're an all-estate winery in Paso Robles. We farm 3 vineyards. We've been doing it since 2001. And we're in it for the long term, and we're in it to make quality grapes and understand our vineyards and make great wine off of it.
Wow. Yeah, so you're second generation, so it is generational.
It is, and I used to be skeptical of that. I didn't come from the wine world, but now that I understand it better, I really do think family-owned and multi-generational, given how long it takes to get to quality in wine, is an important and unique thing.
So you said you have 3 estates, 3 vineyards?
We have 3 vineyards, yeah. All of them are within 30 miles here, but they're all totally different, and it's characteristic, I think, of the California coast, but especially this part of it. The soil changes by the hillside, the climate changes by the hillside. So, we farm cab at both this vineyard, the one that we're sitting on, Hart Hill, and out at Bootjack, which is about 13 miles east of here. And if you blind tasted them, you'd think they were different varietals completely. So it makes this place a really awesome place to explore from a wine drinking perspective.
Wow. And what's your total acreage?
We have about 250 acres under vine.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And your total production?
Any given vintage, we do 15 to 20,000 cases.
Okay.
Across all 3.
And I know you just said that Cabernet. Are you focused on Cabernet, Rhone varieties? What are the varieties of grapes that you have?
Yeah. So we were planted originally as a blending vineyard, partially because we didn't know our land, and partially because we just wanted to take that approach generally. Over time, we were specializing based on what we know does well and what hasn't done so well. So in Paso, we're focused on Bordeaux. And then down in the Edna Valley, which is where one of our vineyards is, we're focused on Pinot. So one or the other, depending on where we're at.
Bordeaux and Burgundy.
Yes, totally.
And where can your wines be found? Are they available across the U.S.?
Yeah, we're in about 32 states. We're mostly in restaurants. At our size, we don't do well in retail generally, like grocery retail. And sometimes you'll find us in specialty wine stores.
So you said you're new to this concept of multi-generational and you didn't grow up in the wine industry. So what is your first memory relevant to wine?
That's a good question. I think it was, early memories of dad and mom sharing wine around the dinner table. It was my first wine memory from a impactful personal drinking standpoint, but it was the first time you get that warm feeling about, the tradition of it, and also just the fact that it's a special thing and
were they big
almost ceremonial.
Were they big wine drinkers?
I think it added a lot to their life having a glass of wine after work on a busy day. I think it was kind of their chance to catch up and chat.
Nice. So you were saying that was not one of the more impactful. Do you have a memory of one of those impactful wines? Was there a particular wine that you drank that you remember going, and it could have been later in the career, where you just said, aha, wow, this, and it set you on a mindset or a path? Yeah,
I think if I had to pull my first memory, it was a Pinot from Sonoma Coast. Where it just blew me away from it was the first time I drank a glass of wine, and I was like, oh, I get it now. It's almost as guttural as you just sit there and you smile and you laugh. And you're like, wow, this just made me really happy.
Right.
So that was the first defined memory. And then when I lived in San Francisco, I was right down the street from a wine bar that I would go to with friends every now and then that really specialized in Italian wines. And that's where the bug really hit me, where you realize it's regional and it's endlessly fascinating from a peel away the layers of what's going on behind the scenes standpoint, and just experimenting with a broader breadth of wines. And any particular variety that kind of jumped out at that point? I really like Piedmont, and honestly, like Nebbiolo, I think is everyone's favorite grape. It's not an original concept. Nebbiolo is awesome. Sangio, like if I can find really good small Sangio producers, I feel like the value there is amazing. And it's almost like we farm Sangiovese, but over in Italy, it just feels like a different animal. Like they've mastered it, and it's wonderful.
So, traveling around the world, traveling domestically, do you think that there is one place that sort of drinks the best in terms of quality?
No, I don't. I have been humbled the more I'm around the wine industry, because I think a lot of people go into it with a black or white, best or worst point of view. And I don't love going at it from that direction because there's way too much involved. So for me, it's more about getting to a region and understanding what's going on and not trying to go in there and judge almost, and just say, what are the neat things they're doing and what's the result, and hopefully embracing it from that direction rather than saying, well, Oregon's better than California. It's a no-brainer.
Well, I'm not going to make any judgments, but if I were to come to your house, what would I find in your cellar? I'm going to find mostly domestic, a nice smattering, an emphasis on any producer or place?
I have mostly Pinot. Mostly California Pinot, actually, because it's hard to find good Burgundy, and when you do, it's really expensive. So I don't have a cellar of the size where I could do that. And then outside of that, I have probably mostly Italian. Yeah, and that's a split between Barolo and Barbaresco and Montepulciano and all that stuff.
And is there anything you opened recently that tasted really good?
Yeah, an Italian Sangio. It was a 2012 Reserva from Caparsa, and it was awesome. Like, it was so good. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's really cool. Like, you were saying that, you're doing Pinot from Etna Valley, you're doing Cabernet up here, you have a little Sangiovese, and you're talking about the varieties of Italy. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No, because from a farming angle, quality comes from understanding your land and finding the grapes that best fit it. So I think it is more about taking the time to understand your land and being disciplined about, if this didn't work, we got to rip it out and we got to go with something else. So I do think there's lots of grapes that can work, and Paso is a good example of that. I think from a wine drinking standpoint, people are always asking, is Paso all about Rhone or is it about Bordeaux? And I would say, depending on your land, it can be either. And if you try and jam Syrah into a hillside where, and this is an example that we're looking at, that is better fitted for Cabernet, then it's not going to work out as well. And you should rip it out and plant Cabernet.
Perfection is almost impossible to achieve.
Yeah, totally. Keep you humble.
Well, I mean, obviously, aspiring to perfection, a lot of other people aspire to get good scores. What's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
I try not to take it seriously, because I think if you wind up chasing your tail if you focus on scores. There's a reality where, from a commercial perspective, you need them, or it helps a lot. I think we have the luxury of taking a long-term view and saying, what do our vineyards do well? What's the winemaking that complements it? And we're not really making wines right now that kind of fit perfectly into a scorekeeper's, or at least some of the bigger ones' palates. And I think that's fine. I think it helps us to take a long-term view and say, that's not our goal. Our goal is to understand our vineyard and to make really balanced wines off it and see where that takes us. While also staying conscious of, okay, these wines are scoring really well. Do we respect them? And can we incorporate some interesting things from them into our own process? But so we don't ignore them, but we don't build into them, is the short answer.
And so you're not making wines that are for a particular palate, for a particular score. So for somebody who hasn't had the opportunity to taste your wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
I think we strike a really interesting balance for Paso. I think a lot of the big name wines in Paso have come at it from a very masculine direction. So it is big, powerful Syrah complemented by kind of a rich winemaking style, use of oak, extraction, all the elements that go into making a kind of big, voluptuous Syrah, for example. And I think we're always coming at it from the feminine side, but trying to incorporate a lot of those textural elements that some of the bigger wines have. So we tend to be more acid driven. We tend to be a little bit later on the extraction. And for a lot of palates, they just frankly say, that is not quality wine. We don't appreciate it. But I think internally we appreciate the balance. Mm-hmm. And while we're trying to stay humble and say, yeah, there's elements of that feedback that we should incorporate, we appreciate the balance that we're getting to, and we don't want to get too far away from that.
And so if space aliens were to land on your property right now, which of your wines would you present to them to introduce them or welcome them to Niner?
It depends on the vineyard. In Paso, it would probably be Fogcatcher because that's our flagship. So all the best Bordeaux varietals that we have in any given vintage, probably about, depending on the vintage, 15 to 25 barrels go into it. So that's generally, the foundations of it are Cab, Malbec, and Petit Verdot.
Okay.
So I would drink that one just to get a sense for the story of the vintage and the quality that came out of our vineyards at the top level. And then Pinot, we've got a really good, solid $35 Pinot out of Edna Valley that I think represents the valley well, and also is a delicious wine. So that's the one from Jespersen, which is our vineyard down there.
So I guess wherever they land is what they get.
Right. Yeah, totally.
So getting down to you as a wine drinker, red, white, or rosé?
Red.
Still or sparkling?
Since I said red, likely still, but Spumante's awesome. So, yeah, it depends on the occasion. What time of day?
And I know that you have a restaurant here at Niner,
Yeah.
So you're serving food all the time, and that's obviously playing a part in enjoying the food, enjoying your wines with food. So how do you personally approach pairing food and wine? Do you feel there are rules of like white wine and fish, red wine and meat, or do you follow more of a textural or no rules? I mean, how do you approach it, and do you approach it here in the winery?
The only way you can do it is to experiment. And we've found that we've been doing this for 5 years now. And you have a sense for what the rough guidelines are. Mm-hmm. But then it's actually, and it's a really cool part of what we do, but whenever we roll out a new menu, we get the winemakers in a room, I'm in a room, the chefs, a lot of the front of house is in a room, and we all sit around and taste it. And then it really comes down to figuring out what that spark is between the two and accentuating it. And that is all about tweaking. Like you go into it with a theory, but that theory gets blown up, and then you have to figure out how to, tweak the recipe slightly, or you maybe use a different wine with that dish, and just trying to figure out how to merge them.
Yeah. And is there a particular pairing that you really like that you're serving up right now in your restaurant?
We've got a special pasta that is pasta that we use from a company down the road that makes it fresh. And then we add like a really simple pork belly and tomato ragu, and then Parmesan. And that with Pinot, like pork and Pinot is just, that's like the one rule that is universal, that it's just like, it's too easy, but it's really good.
So experiment, but if it's pork, it's Pinot.
Yeah, if you're not getting it, just add some bacon and some Pinot and you're good.
So, your family has had this property for a while now. You said you got involved in 2013?
Yep.
Okay. Do you notice from year to year a bigger variation from vintage to vintage, or do you find more similarity? I mean, what do you see here in this lovely part of the Central Coast where consistency is more of a norm?
I think there's both. In the vineyard operational standpoint, there's a huge range, and we've been seeing such a wide range in conditions, whether it's rain, heat, consistency of weather throughout the season, that you really seem to be presented with a different set of challenges every single year. And the extremes seem to be, and this is probably just psychological because we're coming off a couple heat waves, but the extremes seem to be getting to become the norm, where you're like, all right, what's going to hit us this year?
Right.
From that perspective, there is a lot of difference. I think there is still, across vintages, a general profile from this. Paso and Edna are two different things, but a general profile that holds. That probably has to do with just kind of the general growing degree days we have here in the soil. Where, I think you can come at Paso with certain expectations that will be held vineyard to vineyard, but there is a lot of variation within that sub bullet points, vintage to vintage.
So, working with two different regions, Edna Valley, cooler climate, Paso, warmer climate, hotter climate, I should say, do you look for any signs that will sort of, omens, good or bad, that will sort of help you predict what a vintage is going to bring you? And, I mean, obviously, two different places. I don't know if there are different signs.
Yeah, so a lot of, Paso especially, Edna Valley not as much, but Paso you're always kind of presented with a certain set of challenges depending on how much rain you get in the winter. So if you go into it with a good rainy season, then you go into it with a comfort level that at least I have the foundation here, and this was a perfect example of it. We had we didn't have a lot of rain this winter, but we had it at the right time where we got really good canopy development. And when you get that, then you can all of a sudden withstand heat waves like we've had at the end of this year much better. So if we had gone into this year with poor canopy growth, we would have been way more stressed out going into all this stuff. So, yeah, there's certain markers where you say we're either setting ourselves up well or we're totally screwed. But then it's always,
what Mother Nature does.
If you call it before that juice is in a bottle, you're an idiot. Because there's so much that can happen along the way.
So while you cannot exactly call it, and you never know what Mother Nature is going to throw you at any point along in the process, do you have any good luck rituals that the team does at the beginning of harvest?
We always do the traditional champagne toast on the first grape, so that's probably our one tradition. I think the winemakers tend to kind of, it's funny from a winemaker perspective. There's that 3 weeks before harvest where it's coming, and there's just this stress where every winemaker I think deals with it differently, and that's really the feel that I remember going into harvest every year, where it's like, oh yeah, this is coming, and everyone's starting to get incrementally stressed out.
So stress, that's a...
Maybe not a good answer to your question. We're not super superstitious.
Not super superstitious. Okay, well, fair enough. So I won't ask you any more superstition questions, but I will ask you if you ever talk to your vines. It's still kind of in that vein, but do you walk through your vines, we're only a few feet away from vines right here. Yep. You have a lot of property. Mm-hmm. It's hard to walk through all of it, but when you go through the vineyards, have you spoken to your vines or grapes, and have you ever been known to even talk to them in the winery? I mean, I know you have a winemaker for the Paso fruit and a winemaker for the Edna Valley fruit, and they may be more prone to talk to it, but, as you come in here and you're overseeing it, what do you say?
I never talk to vines, grapes, or wine. I talk to myself frequently, so when I walk through the vineyard, probably can hear me talking, and that's to myself.
For them to overhear.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I think probably an architect is the one where it was kind of, when I was young, that was where both my parents thought I would go, and I went.
And what did you end up doing before you joined the family business?
I was doing a bunch of stuff. So I started out in finance, and then figured out finance wasn't connected enough to business. So then I went and worked in small business for 15 years. So it's actually a good overlap with wine. Yeah. But the finance and small business, mostly consumer products I was in. So those two things are pretty useful for wine.
Yeah. And your parents obviously came to this also from another career.
Yep.
And now you find yourself in here. So now that you're just consumed with wine, yep. What do you do when you're not working? What do you do for fun in your free time?
I have a 6-year-old, so it's all about her. So we're either, I work, and then I spend a couple days with her, and it's all about getting out there and exploring. Yeah.
So whatever she thinks is fun is what you think is fun.
It's a negotiation. But she's fortunately very gung-ho and outdoorsy, so we generally are going on hikes and enjoying. It's a great part of living in this part of California, but you're right next to the ocean. You have good hiking. There's an endless number of things to do outside.
And are there any particular sports that you like to do?
Climbing. I used to be a biker before work and daughter took over. But road biking is something I want to get back to once I have the time.
Ah, nice. And if you're planning a romantic evening, what sort of wines do you like to drink to make it a romantic evening?
Simple food, really nice bottle I always love. So if you get like pizza and like $100 bottle of sparkling, I feel like that's a cool deal.
Yeah, it just kind of sets a nice mood. I like that. So when you look back, working in the wine industry or in one of the other industries that you worked in, through your family or through business, is there a piece of advice that you were given at any point that has sort of been a guiding principle for you? And if so, who gave it to you?
Yeah, so right after I got out of finance, I worked for a small sunglass company. And when you're selling, and they sold sunglasses into big retailers like Walmart and some of the others. And to be in retail, you had to be sharp and in the moment and constantly getting into stores because you had no idea how your product was actually being presented to the customer. So we would spend 6 months out of the year just literally walking into stores and trying to figure out, were we kept in stock? Were we presented well? Is everything kind of clicking? And that has never left me from and you met me in the tasting room. Like, you cannot get too far away from the customer, number one. And I would expand that in wine. You can't get too far away from the ground. Like, you got to be getting out into your vines and checking it out. You've got to know your people and be working side by side with them. And you've got to be in the tasting room seeing people's reaction. Because it's way too competitive to not be in it.
Yeah.
Like,
Now, for our listeners who aren't, having to be in a tasting room and do all of that, is there a piece of advice that you would give them as a wine drinker?
from what perspective?
Any perspective.
Okay. Yeah, don't be judgy. Just figure out what you like. Don't go into it with the lens of anyone else.
Yeah.
You free yourself up so much to exploration if you don't try and take the status and the weird elements that the ego elements that wine can be wrapped up with, I think, get in your way of actually exploring the actual world of wine.
Mm-hmm. So definitely not about ego here, but when you look back at your career, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the wine world, but is there, what would you say to date is one of your proudest achievements? You have one opportunity to talk ego-wise right now.
I think it's more the path this winery is on, so it's an ongoing achievement. Mm-hmm. But I think we really do take a long-term view here in a lot of elements of our business, and I'm very proud of that. Like, I think it's rare. It's getting rarer to see that. And for me, the wine industry, you have to take a long-term view to get there. Mm-hmm. And I respect the approach of everyone at our company in that we are all kind of mission-driven and committed to it. But we make decisions that are 20 years out. We don't make decisions that are 3 months out. Mm-hmm. And I really, to me, that's something I'm proud of.
Great. So complete this sentence for me. Mm-hmm. A table without wine is like...
half full.
Okay. And another situation, we're sitting at a table right now. Imagine we were in a restaurant and we're joined by other people drinking your wine. Who from any walk of life would you want to be drinking your wine right now? Living or deceased?
Oh, man. That's a cool one. This is going to sound oddly personal, but my dad unfortunately had to step out because of dementia. So if I could bring someone back, it would be wonderful to sit down with my dad with a whole mind and kind of take him through the wine as it is now, because I think that's something he missed out on, unfortunately, and it would be super cool to sit down around a table and drink a glass and say, hey, Dad, you did this.
That would be awesome. How long ago did he step away from the business?
2013. So it was an even switch. Yeah.
So he really has not seen where it's gone over the last almost 10 years.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I'm sorry.
It's not a bad scenario with that disease as long as you're happy.
Right.
And he is. It's all good.
And he can still drink the wine. He just may not have the wherewithal to see the evolution.
Correct.
Well, if you were going to a deserted island, what 3 wines would you take with you?
Cool. I would take a white, probably sparkling, so I could start drinking at like 9 in the morning and not feel terrible about it.
Would it be champagne or from somewhere else?
It would probably be a good champagne.
Okay.
I feel like they have mastered it. Yeah. So champagne, a Pinot, probably Sonoma Coast, because I think they make wonderful wine up there, and I like the expression. And then third, I'd say Northern Rhone, maybe. Yeah. Randomly, just to give it some diversity.
Got to keep it fresh since you're on a deserted island. Well, you've been so quick with these answers. This is great. I've got one more game we're going to play, so we'll see how the delays go here. But we love to always pair wine and music, whether we listen to it while we're drinking, but a lot of wines will, drinking wine, you have emotions, and it conjures up feelings, and it can conjure up sounds. And so I want, just based on some of the wines we spoke about and some of your wines, to pair it with music. What it either makes you think of by a genre, a particular song, a particular musician. So you told me that one of the first kind of aha moments for you was a Sonoma Coast Pinot. And when you think about that, what does that make you think of?
From a song perspective? I'm not great at this line.
It can be a genre, too, of music.
Maybe Grateful Dead, Althea, just because it's beautiful. And it's not super heavy from a music perspective, so it's just chill and pretty.
And then just for a little diversity, and I'm curious, but what about your Edna Valley Pinot? Different region, same grape, but different music?
Yeah, probably a little faster, so like music never stopped. I'm going to stick with the Grateful Dead theme, but something with a little more energy.
Okay. And talking about your beloved Italian wines that you found a place for, and of course you said you have Barolo and Barbaresco. Let's start with a Barolo and then go with a Barbaresco.
Man. I want to say Metallica and Barolo, but I just don't. It's not like that hit you over the head. That's more Napa Cab. Something powerful but refined. What am I thinking of? Soundgarden, Hunger Strike.
For the Barolo.
Barbaresco's prettier, lighter. I'll go. I have no idea there. I'm blanking. Sorry.
That's okay. And then last but not least, the wine from your Bordeaux blend that you would want to give to the space aliens from this property. Fogcatcher.
Yeah. Led Zeppelin. Yeah. Probably Stairway to Heaven. Like, it just has layers and it evolves. And that song does.
You did well, Andy. Nice and quick. So my almost last question, because I do have another one, but You're here in beautiful Paso Robles, but there are so many wonderful wine regions around the world. What's at the top of your bucket list of regions to go explore?
It's got to be Italy. I haven't done the wine thing there, so if I had to spend, a month exploring Italy, spending more time, I've been down to New Zealand, but was backpacking, not necessarily doing the wine thing, so New Zealand's number 2.
And of course, this is a great place to visit, Paso Robles, so people should head on out here.
Really?
And if they want to head on out here, how can they find Niner, and what are the options for visiting here?
So we're open 7 days a week. We're right on the 46 West, which is basically the road that cuts between the main artery going from San Francisco to LA, the 101, and getting over to the coast where Hearst Castle is. So as you're driving out towards the coast, we're about 2 miles from the 101. And we're open 10 to 5 every day. We do food and wine all day.
Great. So reservations, come and plan a lunch here and do a wine pairing?
Get about 2 weeks ahead of it right now. We're booking up. And come out and enjoy yourself.
Great. And your website is?
NinerWine.com.
There you go. So go to NinerWine.com. Well, Andy, thanks for joining us on Wine Soundtrack, and let's go explore some wine.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.